They handed me the keys and said, "Watch the place for a year." I watered their plants, paid the bills, and slept on that couch like I belonged. A year later, they came home, looked me dead in the eye, and said I was never welcome, plain as a slap. Stick around, I'm about to show you how a favor turned into a full-blown betrayal. The keys felt heavier than they should have. Solid brass, worn smooth from years of use, sitting in the palm of my hand. My Aunt Lisa's fingers, trembling just slightly, had pressed them into mine a moment before. The exchange happened in the driveway, under a sky the color of a fresh bruise, threatening rain. There was this low rumble of expectation in the air, a feeling that this wasn't just a simple transaction, it was a transfer of trust. I was Emma, 32, the reliable one, the one who shows up. I wasn't flashy, didn't have a big career or a dramatic life story. My currency was dependability, and in my family, that was supposed to be worth more than gold. I remember looking at the keys, then up at the house, a 2-story colonial that held every single one of my childhood memories. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was helping. They handed me the keys, and I promised I would watch the house for a year, no questions asked. I had no idea that promise was a signature on a contract I hadn't read. Have you ever agreed to something that sounded small, then watched it blow up in your face? Tell me your story in the comments below. It all started because my aunt and uncle were leaving the country. My uncle had landed a 1-year consulting gig in Germany, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity he couldn't pass up. It was a rush job. They had to pack up their lives in under a month. The house was the biggest loose end. They couldn't sell it on such short notice, and they didn't want to leave it empty. My mom was the one who first floated my name. "Emma can do it," she'd said over a family dinner, her voice full of casual confidence. "She's between Lisas anyway. It's perfect." I remember my older brother, Mark, scoffing from across the table. He was a junior partner at a downtown law firm, always dressed in a suit that looked like it cost more than my car. He took a slow sip of wine and said, "I'm not sure that's a great idea. It's a lot of responsibility." He said responsibility like it was a word I didn't know how to spell. His refusal to do it himself was immediate and predictable. He was too busy, too important. His own house was a sterile glass box in a new development. This old place with its drafty windows and creaky floors was beneath him. But Aunt Lisa just beamed at me, her eyes pleading. She came over and wrapped me in a hug that smelled like lavender and desperation. "It would be such a weight off our minds, sweetie," she whispered, "just knowing someone we trust is here." That's what sealed it, that word, trust. I agreed for practical reasons, of course. My apartment lease was ending, and the thought of saving a year's worth of rent was a massive relief. It would finally give me the chance to build up my savings, maybe even think about a down payment on a small place of my own someday. But the real reasons were emotional. I wanted to be the one they could count on. I wanted to prove Mark wrong. Most of all, I wanted to feel like I was at the center of the family, even just for a year. I wanted to be essential. The first few weeks were exactly what you'd expect. I settled into a quiet routine. I forwarded their mail, paid the utility bills online the day they arrived, and figured out the thermostat's weird quirks. I even fixed the leaky faucet under the kitchen sink myself after watching a few videos online. I sent a picture of the finished job to our family group chat, and the replies came flooding back. Aunt Lisa sent a string of heart emojis. My uncle replied, "You're a lifesaver, Em. We owe you big time." Even my mom texted me privately. "See, I told them you were the right one."
Oh, there's so many yummy vegetarian options out there. You could try like lentil soup, veggie burgers, tofu stir-fry. The possibilities are endless. But there were strange little things right from the start. Things that felt like a loose thread on a perfect sweater. A few doors in the house were locked. The door to my uncle's office and a closet in the master bedroom. When I asked for the keys, Aunt Lisa had waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't worry about those. Just old work files and personal things. We've got everything we need." It seemed reasonable enough, so I didn't push. Then I noticed the safe. It was a small gray box tucked away on the floor of their walk-in closet, partially hidden under a stack of old blankets.
It wasn't my business, I told myself. Every family has its secrets, its private corners. And whenever the conversation with my aunt and uncle veered toward finances, the cost of the move, the upkeep on the house, there was a sudden hush. Their voices would get tight and they'd change the subject. Again, I shrugged it off, not my place to ask. I was just the house sitter, the caretaker. I was there to water the plants and make sure the pipes didn't freeze, nothing more. But on the second night, after they had gone, after the silence of the big house had really settled in, I found something. I was cleaning out the clutter on the little table by the entryway, sorting through old magazines and takeout menus, when I saw it. A thick, cream-colored envelope was tucked under a phone book. My name, Emma, was written across the front in my aunt's familiar looping handwriting. For a second, my heart lifted. I thought it was a thank you note, maybe with some emergency cash inside. But as I picked it up, I saw the smaller print underneath my name. It said, "To be opened only by Mark in case of emergency." It wasn't for me at all. It was about me. Would you open a letter like that? Tell me why or why not in the comments. I held that envelope for a long time, the paper cool against my skin. The temptation to slide a fingernail under the seal was immense. What kind of emergency? And why Mark? He was the one who thought I couldn't handle it. Was this some kind of instruction manual for him on how to clean up my inevitable mess? The thought was humiliating. But in the end, I didn't open it. I slid it into the back of the junk drawer behind a tangle of old chargers and rubber bands. I told myself it was a contingency plan, a responsible thing for them to do. It was nothing personal. I forced myself to forget about it and focus on the task at hand, making this house my home for a year. The rhythm of my life shifted to match the rhythm of the house. I learned which floorboards creaked on the way to the bathroom at night. I discovered the best spot on the porch to drink my coffee in the morning sun. The mailman started calling me by name. The neighbors, a sweet elderly couple named the Hendersons, would wave every time I pulled into the driveway. I started to feel like I belonged there. I wasn't just a guest anymore, I was the house's heartbeat. When the garbage disposal started making a grinding noise, I didn't even bother to call them about it. I just called a plumber and paid the $150 bill out of my own pocket. It felt like the right thing to do. It was a small gesture, but it made me feel even more invested, like I was truly caring for the place. A week later, I noticed the flower beds out front were overgrown with weeds. On a whim, I spent a whole Saturday pulling them up, turning the soil, and planting a small garden of my own with lavender and rosemary. As I pressed the roots into the dark earth, my hands covered in dirt, I caught myself daydreaming. I imagined hosting a barbecue in the backyard, stringing up fairy lights, having friends over. I started to see a future for myself in a place like this, a life. It was a dangerous thought. The loneliness would creep in sometimes, usually late at night. That was so big, and my presence felt so small within its walls. In those quiet hours, around 2 in the morning, the silence was deafening. I'd wander from room to room, tracing the patterns on the wallpaper, running my hand along the smooth, cool wood of the dining room table. I started to feel a profound sense of ownership, not of the property, but of the life within it. The calls from my aunt and uncle became less frequent. At first, it was every few days, then once a week. Soon, it was a text message every other week. Their messages, once filled with gratitude and exclamation points, became polite and distant. Hope all is well. House okay? It felt like they were checking a box. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cool, professional distance. The first real seed of doubt, the one I couldn't ignore, was planted during one of those rare phone calls. I had called my aunt to ask about the property tax bill that had arrived. She picked up, but she sounded distracted, her voice hushed. I could hear my uncle talking in the background, his voice tight and serious. He didn't know I was on the line. I heard him say the words title issues, and then, a few seconds later, we just need a clean exit. My aunt quickly shushed him, telling him she was on the phone with me. When she came back on the line, her voice was overly bright. "Just some boring paperwork, sweetie. Don't you worry about it." I tried to believe her. I told myself it was just bureaucracy, the logistical headache of being an expat. But the phrase clean exit echoed in my mind. It sounded so final. It sounded like they weren't planning on coming back. From that day on, I started keeping records. I created a spreadsheet to track every bill I paid. I took photos of my small repairs. I scanned and saved every receipt. It felt a little paranoid, but a quiet instinct told me I needed a paper trail. I needed proof that I was holding up my end of the bargain. A few weeks later, I was looking for a shared tax document in the family's cloud drive when I saw it. It was a folder labeled Household Admin. My curiosity got the better of me. I clicked it. Inside, there were a few boring files: insurance policies, appliance manuals, and then I saw it. A single image file, a screenshot of an email. The sender was my Uncle John. The recipient was a name I didn't recognize, someone at a local real estate agency. The subject line was simply, "Re the property." I opened it, my heart pounding in my chest. The email was short. "Thanks for the preliminary valuation," my uncle had written. "We'll be in touch soon to discuss the next steps for the sale." Would you confront them, or would you wait? My first instinct was to call them immediately, to demand an explanation. My hands were shaking as I held my phone. But what would I say? I was snooping in your files and found an email you didn't want me to see? I couldn't do it. Instead, I opted for a softer approach. The next time my aunt texted, asking how things were, I replied casually, "Everything's great, just getting settled in for the long haul. So glad we have this arrangement for the whole year." I emphasized the last few words, hoping for a confirmation, a reassurance. Her reply came back hours later. A single word. "Good." No exclamation point, no emoji, just good. That was the beginning of the cold shoulder. The communication, already sparse, dwindled to almost nothing. My texts would be left on read for days. When I tried to call, it would go straight to voicemail. The few times I did get them on the phone, the conversations were clipped and strained, full of long, awkward silences. It was like talking to polite strangers. The betrayal started to feel real, a physical ache in my chest. I thought about all the little things I'd done for them over the years, things that had never come with a price tag. The countless times I'd babysat my cousins for free, the dinners I'd brought over when my aunt was sick, the time I'd covered my uncle's bounced check at the grocery store without a word, quietly putting the $50 back in his wallet later. I had always been there, the reliable one, the one who never asked for anything in return. Now it felt like all that goodwill had evaporated. My brother, Mark, who had made a point of calling me every Sunday to check in, which was really just his way of making sure I hadn't burned the place down, suddenly stopped calling. I sent him a text asking if everything was okay. He replied a day later, "Busy at work, talk soon." We never did. Aunt Lisa, the one who had hugged me so tightly in the driveway, now avoided my video calls. On the rare occasion we did connect, her eyes would dart around, never quite meeting mine. My mom's voice on the phone became brittle. When I asked her if she knew what was going on, she just said, "I'm sure it's nothing, Emma. You're probably just overthinking things." It was the classic family gaslighting, designed to make me feel like I was the crazy one. The real turning point came a few months later. My cousin was having an engagement party. I wasn't sure if I was even invited until I saw a picture of the invitation on social media. I texted my aunt and asked about it. "Oh, of course you're invited, honey," she texted back, the fake enthusiasm practically dripping from the screen. "We just assumed you knew." I went, determined to act normal, to prove that I was still part of the family. It was a mistake. From the moment I walked in, I felt like an outsider. I saw them whispering in corners, their heads close together. Every time I approached a group, the conversation would die, and they'd give me tight, forced smiles. Later in the evening, I was standing near the kitchen when I heard Mark telling a story to a small group of cousins. He was laughing, a cruel, sharp sound. I couldn't hear all of it, but I heard my name, and then the phrase, "playing queen of the castle." The group around him laughed, a joke at my expense. I felt my face burn with shame. I left without saying goodbye. That night, I cried myself to sleep on the couch that was supposed to be my bed for a year, in the house that was supposed to be my home. I woke up around midnight to a sound from the front door, a soft metallic click, followed by the whisper of paper sliding across the hardwood floor. I crept out of the living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. There, in the dim moonlight filtering through the window, was a piece of paper. It was a formal-looking document. I picked it up, my hands trembling. At the top, in bold letters, it said, "Notice to vacate." Below it, a single, chilling sentence. "Your authorization to access this property has been revoked, effective immediately." Would you pack up your things right then and there, or would you start digging for proof first? I need to know what you would have done. For a long moment, I just stood there, the letter shaking in my hand. The words didn't seem real. Revoked, immediately. It felt like a punch to the gut. My first thought wasn't anger, it was confusion. How? Why? There was no phone call, no warning, just this cold, impersonal notice slid under the door like a pizza flyer. My mind raced back to the agreement, the promise of a year. Had I imagined it? Was I going crazy? I walked back to the living room, sank onto the couch, and read the notice again. It was printed on letterhead from a law firm I'd never heard of. My uncle's name was typed at the bottom. There was no signature. My shock slowly hardened into a cold, clear resolve. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to pack my bags in the middle of the night and disappear. They wanted me gone quietly, but I wasn't going to make it that easy for them. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. I found my mom, my aunt, and my uncle all sitting in the kitchen, a united front. Mark was there too, standing by the counter, arms crossed over his chest, looking smug. The air was thick with a rehearsed calm. I held up the notice. My voice was surprisingly steady. "I think you have some explaining to do," I said. Aunt Lisa wouldn't look at me. She just stared into her coffee cup. It was my uncle who spoke, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Emma, there's been a misunderstanding." It was the most infuriatingly calm, corporate-speak answer imaginable. "A misunderstanding?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You slid an eviction notice under my door in the middle of the night. That's not a misunderstanding, that's an ambush." Mark stepped forward. "We thought it was better this way," he said, his tone condescending. "Less drama." "Less drama for who, Mark? For you?" I shot back. "Because this feels pretty dramatic to me." My mom finally spoke, her voice thin and reedy. "We just never meant for it to be a long-term thing, honey. You were just supposed to be watching the place." "For a year," I almost shouted. "That was the deal. A year. We all agreed." That's when they dropped the bomb. My aunt looked up, her eyes cold. "Frankly, Emma, we've been concerned. You've been overstepping. Paying for things without asking, rearranging furniture. It's like you think you own the place." Mark chimed in, piling on. "And the utility bills have been higher than usual. We think you've been careless, maybe having people stay over." The accusation was so absurd, so baseless, it knocked the wind out of me. I had been meticulously careful, living like a ghost in their house, trying to be as little of an inconvenience as possible. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to tell them I had receipts for everything, photos of every repair, but before I could, my uncle held up a hand to silence me. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A new voice filled the room, tinny and remote from the speakerphone. "This is Jonathan Baird, counsel for the family," the voice said. "Miss Evans, the situation is quite simple. By establishing residency in the home, you've inadvertently created a form of tenancy. From a legal standpoint, you've become a complication." A complication? I wasn't a niece, a family member who had done them a favor. I was a legal problem that needed to be solved. The lawyer's voice droned on, but I barely heard him. All the pieces clicked into place. The locked doors, the distant calls, the realtor email. This had been the plan all along. They hadn't needed a house sitter. They had needed a placeholder, someone to keep the place warm until they were ready to get rid of it. And me. The final words from the speakerphone cut through the haze. They were sharp and clear and aimed directly at me. We're proceeding with the sale of the property, and we simply can't have you in the house. If your own family's lawyer told you we can't have you, what would be your very next move? I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a breakdown. Something inside me went quiet and cold. The hurt was still there, a raw, gaping wound. But something else was taking its place. Rage. A calm, methodical rage. I just looked at them, one by one. My aunt, who couldn't meet my eyes. My uncle, with his blank, corporate stare. My mother, looking helpless. And Mark, with that triumphant smirk on his face. I didn't say another word. I just turned around, walked out the door, got in my car, and drove away. When I got back to the house, my house, for now, I didn't pack. I went straight to the junk drawer in the kitchen. I pulled out the sealed envelope, the one with my name on it, the one I wasn't supposed to open. My hands didn't even tremble this time as I tore it open. Inside wasn't a letter. It was a single-page document, a legal form. It was a quitclaim deed, a document used to transfer property interest. It was dated a week before they left. It was signed by my aunt and uncle, transferring ownership of the house to a family trust. And the trustee of that trust? My brother, Mark. This wasn't about a sale. This was about an inheritance I was being cut out of. That's when I went into what I can only describe as detective mode. The grief was still there, but I walled it off. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford. I needed facts. I needed evidence. I spent the next 48 hours on a mission. I pulled out the shoebox where I'd been keeping all my receipts. The plumber, the electrician for a faulty breaker, the landscaping service I'd hired to clean up the yard. I scanned every single one. I went through my text history, screenshotting every conversation. Every thank you, you're a lifesaver, every vague one-word reply. I organized them chronologically in a folder on my laptop. I created a timeline, documenting every interaction, every promise, every lie. It was a slow, painful process, like picking through the wreckage of a burned-out building. Each piece of evidence was a reminder of my own naivety, my own misplaced trust. But with each piece, my resolve hardened. I was building a case. I remembered the odd financial conversations, the hushed tones. I started digging into public records online. It took a few hours, but I found it. A lien had been filed against the property 6 months ago for a substantial unsecured business loan my uncle had taken out. The debt was much larger than I ever would have imagined. They weren't just selling the house for a profit. They were selling it to stay afloat. They were desperate. The pieces were starting to form a very ugly picture. They needed to sell the house quickly and cleanly to pay off this debt. The trust, with Mark as the trustee, was a way to streamline the process, to cut through any red tape. And me? I was the red tape. The voicemail came to me in a flash. A few months back, a cousin had left me a rambling message meant for my aunt. I'd saved it because it was funny at the time. I listened to it again. Tucked in the middle of her gossiping, she said it. "I'm so glad you guys figured out the house situation. Once it's sold and Emma's out, things will be so much easier for everyone." At the time, I'd assumed she meant easier for me, that I'd be free of the responsibility. Now I understood. I was the situation they had to figure out. The neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was my next stop. I knocked on his door, and he invited me in for iced tea. I asked him, as casually as I could, if he'd noticed anything unusual at the house over the past few months. His brow furrowed. "Well, your brother and another gentleman, a realtor I think, were here a few times, back in the spring." He said they spent a lot of time in the backyard, talking about lot lines and zoning. He even remembered Mark saying something about needing to time the listing perfectly once the house is vacant. The final piece, the one that broke me and rebuilt me all at once, I found by accident. I was deleting old files from my laptop to free up space when I came across a temporary document I downloaded from the shared family drive months ago and forgotten about. It was a draft, an unsigned memorandum of understanding. It outlined the plan for the family trust. I scrolled through the dense legal language, and then I saw the clause. It was a single sentence, buried in a paragraph about asset distribution. It read, "For the purposes of this trust, Emma Evans is to be excluded from any and all proceeds related to the sale or transfer of the primary residence." The document was dated 2 months before they ever asked me to watch the house. Have you ever seen a plan like this play out in your own life? Drop your story in the comments. I really need to know I'm not alone in this. Seeing those words in black and white changed everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a plan that went wrong. It was a premeditated, calculated betrayal from the very beginning. They had smiled in my face, hugged me, called me a lifesaver, all while knowing they had a document disowning me.
Tucked away on a hard drive. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the stacks of paper around me. I had 2 choices. I could fold, pack my bags, and walk away with this horrible secret poisoning me from the inside out. Or I could fight. By sunrise, I had made my decision. I wasn't just going to fight, I was going to bring the receipts. My first call was to a free legal aid clinic in the city. I spoke to a young, sharp paralegal who listened to my entire story without interruption. When I finished, there was a pause on the line. "You have a signed document excluding you, dated before you moved in?" she asked, a note of disbelief in her voice. "Yes," I said. "And you have records of every bill you paid and every repair you made?" "Yes." "Ma'am," she said slowly, "I think you need to come in." My next step was more delicate. I logged onto my social media, a platform I rarely used. I didn't want to air our dirty laundry. I didn't want to seem hysterical or vengeful. I wrote a careful, measured post. I didn't use any names. I just said I was in a complicated housing situation due to a family misunderstanding and asked if anyone had recommendations for legal resources or had been through something similar. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, I had dozens of comments and private messages. People shared their own stories of family betrayal, of being cut out of wills, of being used and discarded. There was a flood of empathy, but more importantly, there was practical advice. Suggestions for lawyers, links to tenant rights organizations, warnings about what to expect. A community of strangers was rallying around me, and it gave me a strength I didn't know I had. An old friend from college who was now a paralegal offered to look over my documents and give me an unofficial opinion. The Hendersons from next door offered to write a sworn affidavit stating how meticulously I'd cared for the property. The support was a lifeline in a sea of betrayal. The family, of course, doubled down. I got a text from Mark. It was blunt. "You have 1 week to vacate the premises before we file for a formal eviction." He was trying to intimidate me, to scare me into running. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a picture of his text, saved it, and forwarded it to the legal aid clinic. Then, I posted a quiet update online, a simple timeline. Date I agreed to house sit for 1 year. Dates I paid for major repairs out of pocket. Date I received notice to vacate. I attached a few redacted receipts. I didn't add any commentary, I just let the facts speak for themselves. That's when a local blogger who covered community issues picked up the thread. She sent me a message asking if she could share my anonymous story. I agreed. The post went up, and the family started to feel the heat. Suddenly, their private misunderstanding had an audience. That's when I got the email that changed the entire game. It was from the realtor my uncle had been corresponding with. Her name was on the notice I'd found under the door. She must have seen the blog post. Her message was short and cryptic. "I feel I must inform you that my brokerage is pausing the listing. There appears to be a pre-existing lien on the property tied to a family debt that was not fully disclosed.
Furthermore, there is a name missing from the transfer paperwork that is stalling the title search. A name was missing. I went back to the quitclaim deed I had found, the one putting the house in a trust for Mark. I looked at the signatures. My aunt, my uncle, but there was a third line for another owner, and it was blank. I pulled up the public property records again, and there it was. Years ago, my grandmother had put my name on the deed alongside my aunt and uncle. I was a part owner, a very small percentage, but my name was on the title. They hadn't just tried to cut me out of an inheritance. They had tried to sell a house that, legally, I partially owned right out from under me. And the unsigned memorandum was their attempt to erase me from the equation before I ever found out. They didn't just betray me, they committed fraud. Would you go public with that information, or would you handle it quietly through the lawyers? Tell me your take. Does airing it all out actually help, or does it just make things worse? The knowledge that my name was on the deed was like a shot of adrenaline. This wasn't just a moral fight anymore, it was a legal one, and I was standing on solid ground. I immediately took the new information to the legal clinic. They assigned my case to a pro bono lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah who seemed to live on black coffee and righteous indignation. She read through my file, her expression growing more grim with each page. When she got to the part about my name being on the deed, she looked up at me and a slow smile spread across her face. "Well, Emma," she said, "this just got a whole lot more interesting." Within 24 hours, Sarah had filed for an emergency hearing with a mediator. We submitted everything: the timeline, the receipts, the screenshot of the realtor email, the unsigned memorandum, and a certified copy of the property deed with my name clearly on it. The family reacted with predictable outrage. Their lawyer sent a blistering letter accusing me of harassment and of trying to obstruct the sale for personal gain. But it was too late. The public sympathy, thanks to the blog post, had already shifted. The realtor, not wanting to be associated with a fraudulent sale, officially froze the listing pending a full legal investigation. The showdown happened not in a courtroom, but in a sterile conference room at a mediation office. It was the first time I had seen them all together since that morning in my parents' kitchen. They sat on one side of a long mahogany table, their lawyer between them. I sat on the other side with Sarah. The air was thick with resentment. For the first hour, their lawyer did all the talking, painting me as a disgruntled, opportunistic freeloader. I stayed silent, letting him dig his own grave. Then Sarah calmly began to lay out our case. She presented the evidence piece by piece, her voice never rising. When she finally produced the copy of the deed with my name on it, a hush fell over the room. I watched my uncle's face drain of color. Mark started to say something, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm. That's when the carefully constructed facade crumbled. The secrets started to spill out. The business loan wasn't just a small debt, it was a catastrophic failure that was threatening to bankrupt my uncle. The plan to sell the house was a desperate, last-ditch effort to cover their losses. They had put the house in a trust under Mark's name because his credit was clean, hoping to hide the asset from creditors. Cutting me out wasn't just about greed, it was about speed. Getting my signature, explaining the situation to me, would have taken time they didn't have. So they made a fear-driven, shameful decision to pretend I didn't exist, hoping to push the sale through before anyone noticed. Their betrayal wasn't born from malice, not entirely. It was born from panic and shame. They were so terrified of their failure being exposed that they were willing to sacrifice me to hide it. In the end, I had a choice. I could have dragged them through a public court battle, exposed every lie, and probably won a significant settlement. But looking at their faces, beaten, exposed, and pathetic, I realized I didn't want their money. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my dignity back. I chose to walk away. Not with nothing. Sarah helped me negotiate a small, private settlement. It was enough to cover the money I'd spent on repairs, the cost of moving, and a security deposit on a new apartment. But more importantly, it came with a condition. They had to sign a document legally acknowledging my partial ownership and the validity of my claim. It was my proof, my vindication. I walked out of that conference room with a box of receipts, a signed legal document, and the knowledge that sometimes family is a contract, not a promise. But I still have one thing they don't: the story. So now you've heard it all. Would you have fought for more, or would you have folded and walked away like I did? Drop your vote and your reason why in the comments. I read every single one.